Hey YouTube, got this video for you. We got 5 lesser known quotes in support of the Second Amendment and private firearm ownership overall. Let's begin. If you will not fight for the right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory will be sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a small chance of survival. There may be even a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no hope of victory, because it is better to perish than to live as slaves. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. A good quote to keep in mind, as when you have the advantage and have good things going on in society, you gotta keep those good things going. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a do-or-die situation. And of course, that old adage, it's better to die on your feet than to be enslaved on your knees and in shackles. For the next quote in defense of the Second Amendment, what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. Thomas Jefferson, Letter to James Madison, 1787. That rifle, hanging on the wall of the working class flat or laborer's cottage, is a symbol of democracy. It is our job to see that it stays there. George Orwell, Don't Let Colonel Blimp Ruin the Home Guard. Imagine that, a renowned democratic socialist in favor of weapons in the hands of the common man. Now, in this statement, he probably wasn't in favor of the Second Amendment as we Americans see it. However, he definitely was pushing for a privately owned armory of citizens who had free access to these weapons to be used to stave off tyrannical forces. So pretty much saying that literal firearms in the hands of normal people like you and me is what separates us from a true dictatorship in a given country. Something to keep in mind. A Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every black home, and it should be used for that protection which the law refuses to give. Ida B. Wells Barnett. A big proponent of the civil rights movement in the late 1800s and early 1900s, one of the founders of the NAACP, people forget that lots of the Jim Crow laws and oppression given to Black Americans at the time was the restrictions on firearm ownership, since if we were to recognize all Americans as citizens, that include not just voting, speech, and written word, and religion, but also be able to own and carry firearms as well. And unfortunately, for decades, there was the suspicion that if we were to give firearms to Black Americans, there would be retribution from decades, if not centuries, of abuse. So there you go. There's another lesser-known quote on the pros of owning a firearm. With guns in the hands of the public, sure, there will be tragedies, but without them, there will be genocides. Author unknown. It's kind of crazy. You look back on history, and then in the cases where there was either voluntary relinquishment of firearms or forced seizure by the government of firearms, almost always it seemed to end up in a lot of people dead from that government's hands. Across time, across nationalities, across cultures, it's fairly consistent. That said, I will be one of many to admit that there are too many mass killings, too many mass shootings in the United States, but also knowing our history in the United States, that without that private firearm ownership, even this government could be just as violent as it was in its early years, particularly during their conflicts with Native Americans. There are several occasions where their weapons were seized, or they were even given up voluntarily, only to end in widespread bloodshed. Something to keep in mind. Subscribe for more. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.